Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel. This is Business Connections Live with Steve Hyland.
Hello there, welcome along. It is Business Connections Live, the program for entrepreneurs, SMEs and also business owners. Now on today's show, we look at the importance of understanding how behaviour originates in the brain for leading and engaging your teams. That employee engagement. How does it work? What's going on behind the scenes? How do you make certain you can engage somebody? Do you understand the science of engaging your employees? Well, joining us in the studio today is Deborah Hume. She's the Director of Minerva Engagement. And we are talking today, this is a very highbrow subject for us, we are talking neuroscience. Deborah, it's lovely to have you with us on the program today.
Thank you.
Do you know, I must say, on Saturday, I was at a meeting and somebody stood up and they gave a talk about neuroscience. Neuroscience, first of all, what is it? And whatever it is, it's going mainstream, isn't it?
It is. It's neuroscience is coming over the fence, if you like, into the business community from the science community. And what the research that's coming out of that science community is enabling us to understand better what's happening in our brains and how behaviour originates in the brain. And this is something that's really interesting and informative for business, particularly in the area of employee engagement.
Is it common sense that we're now putting a label on, or is there more to it than that? Is it understanding the common sense?
That's an interesting question. No, it's a lot more than common sense. It's actually putting the hard facts, if you like, and the evidence around some things that we've known previously. So some things that we would know through behavioural observation or we would know through gut instinct. So it's confirming some of those things, but it's also changing our view on some of the things that we have assumed up until now were correct. So for example, if you look at Maslow's triangle, in his hierarchy of needs, the need for humans to have friendship and to have social bonding sits in the middle of his triangle. But actually what neuroscience is showing us is that that social need is so fundamental to humans that actually it should sit at the bottom of the triangle alongside food and water and all of our really basic human needs.
Well, listen, we're going to get right into the whole world of neuroscience. We're going to talk a little bit more. And as I said, it does seem to be a prime subject at the moment when you're talking to people that are in business. But your background is a little bit before that. It is about employee engagement. It's about how to talk to individuals who are working for you. Just tell us a little bit about your background.
So my background, very early days, started off in recruitment, but then I moved into internal communication. And my interest in employee engagement grew as I started to really understand and realise the impact of effective communication, but also the need for leaders and for organisations, if you like, to engage and motivate their people if they wanted to really impact business performance.
Do you think across the board that industry in general, and I know you've worked for some large organisations, but does the industry actually really get that employee engagement bit? Are they paying it lip service, or are they really now concentrating on it? And those that do concentrate after you've been talking to them, do they see benefits in engagement of their employees?
I think it would be unfair to say that businesses are paying it lip service. I think there is a real understanding now of the importance of employee engagement to business performance, and there's been lots of surveys and correlations done between employee engagement, productivity, customer advocacy. I think where the difficulty is how to actually make that real, how to really impact it so that you have a very high level of employee engagement and on a sustainable basis. And where neuroscience is coming in and where it's helping is it's giving us some real understanding, and from that some real tools that we can put into practice within organisations. So if you look at, for example, emotional intelligence, we've understood emotion.
Something I have none. I have none of it.
Well, I'm not sure that's the case. But if you look at it, if you look at that, we have understood that intellectually and conceptually for quite some time. There was a wonderful book by Daniel Goleman in the 1990s that really shone the light on emotional intelligence and the interplay between IQ and EQ. The problem has been in how you take that understanding, because I think people generally understand the importance of it, but how do you take that and make that real and practical within an organisation? And that's where neuroscience is adding that piece to the jigsaw, if you like, to help us take what we know to be a good thing and apply it in business.
When you go into an organisation, are there in general mistakes that organisations are making just because of their scale, their size, the number of people they're dealing with, the lack of expertise perhaps in that sphere with the management team or whatever? Is there other organisations? Is there a mistake that you see in general?
Again, I just from my perspective, I'd be careful around the language, because mistake is quite hard, and actually we're all on a learning journey, and people will do different things in different situations. An issue, or challenge is probably better. Actually, challenge is probably better.
Good old management team. Well, is your business having a challenge? Yes.
I think one of the challenges that I do see quite regularly, and this is fair, is that people who sit in the leadership position don't understand the importance of their own behaviour. They don't really appreciate how much their behaviour impacts and resonates across an organisation. So we now know that behaviour is hugely contagious. It travels through organisations like electricity through wires. It goes really fast. So if your behaviour is somewhat emotional or irrational, or if you're displaying behaviours that are not the same as the words that are coming out of your mouth, then people will pick that up very, very quickly. And that has a huge impact on teams and on organisations.
Do you think we still see in some organisations the culture of fear, management by fear? It's I've been involved with organisations where it's in the name of. This is what so-and-so would want you to do, so therefore, because of the gravitas or the position held, you would nearly be working in fear of that person.
Unfortunately, yes. I think some organisations have made some great strides in that area, but there is a default in certain situations to, I just want it done, just do it. And that command control fear environment is not conducive at all to employee engagement. One of the things, again, that we know now is that the brain operates on two principles effectively, fear and reward. And at any point in time, we are either in a fear state or a reward state or somewhere in between. When we are in a fear state, our ability to think, our ability to take decisions, our ability to be creative is severely reduced. That has huge implications within business. However, managing or working in a way that helps people move towards a reward state is very, very difficult, and it requires thought and self-reflection and insight and understanding. But it's the reward state that releases the creativity, that releases the innovation.
When you look back at where you've come from, because obviously you've been involved with employee engagement and all the way from recruitment, as you look back, are there things that you would have done differently, do you think, should we say 10, 20 years ago, because of the knowledge you now know? Yes.
Yes. I think one of the things that's come through, yes, sorry, in
no, that's okay.
In
that's
simplicity, it's I'm just thinking through the question. I think one of the things that I'm much more aware of myself as an individual is the importance of, yes, the language you use, but also the things that really impact other people's behaviour. So, for example, to put it in context, I think that's the easiest way of doing it. If you're going through a change programme, we now know again that uncertainty is one of the things that actually pushes people very quickly towards that threat state. Unfortunately, when you're going through a change program, you don't always have the answers, but there are things that you can do along the way to inject certainty as you go. So, for example, even if the only thing that you can say is, look, all we know is that we're going to be able to communicate with you once a week, and we will communicate with you once a week. If we've got nothing to tell you, we'll tell you, but we will communicate with you once a week. Something as simple as that will reduce the level of uncertainty and reduce that fear state. So there are ideas and insight and knowledge that I now have as a result of neuroscience, and I now understand better the implications of what I do and don't do, that I can then weave into the programs and the strategies and the activities that we undertake within organisations, things that I wouldn't have known 5 or 6 years ago.
Now, what we are going to do on today's program, we're going to go through some of those things that maybe you can actually implement into your business. That's what's so exciting about today. Now, you may have read about it. As I said at the very beginning of the program, it seems to be the kind of buzzword at the moment within industry. There are a lot of practitioners out there that are talking about neuroscience at the moment, but it is relatively new. Also, what we've got to do, I suppose, is we've got to differentiate what the difference between neuroscience and some of the other buzzwords that we've heard over the past number of years, things like neuro-linguistic programming and NLP and those kind of things as well. We've got to differentiate what neuroscience is all about and what it could mean to an organisation like yours. What kind of benefits would your business actually get from it? And what size business will it work in? Is it a small SME, or is it a medium-scale organisation, or is it a large organisation? Does it work for all but in different forms, or is it the same techniques, the same science right across the different size companies? We've got all that to come on this edition of Business Connections Live. It's going to be a real insight into how to maybe you re-engage your workforce, get more out of them and make them feel happier in the workplace. And that's all to come on this edition of Business Connections Live with Deborah Hume from Minerva Engagement. You're watching Business Connections Live. We're live on a Monday. It's great to have your company as always. Thank you very much for just sitting there in front of YouTube, or maybe you're going to be listening to us on Stitcher. By the way, if you go onto iTunes and you are downloading the program, well, don't forget, do leave a 5-star review and your comments about the shows as well. If you are finding them useful for your business, then make certain that you tell the entire world. The downloads, the engagement on iTunes is phenomenal. And if you're watching us right now on Facebook, look, leave a comment. How do you feel about what we're talking about? Have you used it yourself? Have you seen benefits within your organisation? Would you like to find out more about it? Don't forget, you can go to Deborah's website and you'll be able, after the programme, if you wish, to actually get in contact with her. And it may be something that's going to be useful for your organisation or for your business to actually explore and then maybe implement into your business operation. Now, you are watching Business Connections Live. As always, we're here every Monday with a great programme. Last week's program was a fascinating insight into big brands. What lessons can big brands teach the small businesses, the small brands? What are the big brand lessons that you can learn? Well, Michael Johnson, he's the Managing Director of AA Financial Services. He joined us on last week's edition of the programme, and we were talking about how you go about defining your proposition, the resolution, the call to action. What are the big brand lessons that you can learn from somebody like the AA? If you've missed the programme, here's an opportunity to get a bit of a tease of what happened on last week's edition of Business Connections Live. Now, on today's show, we're going to be discussing how big business experiences can help SMEs. Yes, businesses just like yours. Joining me in the studio today is Michael Johnson. He's the Managing Director at AA Financial Services.
And I think the first thing you've got to do when you're setting out on any venture is really understand the market. And understanding the market is probably the first place that you've got to start, because without that bigger context, you'll never be able to position your product or your service or whatever it is you're developing in the right way. The larger the company and the bigger the corporation, probably the more they've got to protect. So there's a lot more checks and balances in place, whether it's legal, compliance, or whether it's the financial director giving you a hard time about how much money you're investing. There's a lot more people to satisfy. But I'd suggest that the processes of getting something to market, or indeed doing something new, should be the same, or at least follow a similar thought pattern. An entrepreneur has the advantage of being very close to its customers, and there's not many people in the way. And in a large corporation, the best way to innovate is by being very close to your customers. But as you can imagine, in a corporation of 30 or 40,000 people, you're a small cog in a very big wheel. I'd say from my experience in some large organisations, you're always trading off speed and quality, because in essence you're part of a big machine, and we all want to do things quickly, but in order to do them at the scale that a big machine does them at, you've got to put quality and checks behind it. So we're always trading that off. Whereas in a big business, we're a bit clinical and a little bit removed. In a small business, quite often you're very close to the issue and you don't look at it necessarily objectively. And therefore I think it's a balancing act. I think by definition, you're generally in a large corporation, you're not putting your money at risk, which a small business owner or an entrepreneur would be. I think trust is a really good point, and for different products and for different sectors, trust could mean different things. Obviously, if you're in financial services like I am or we are, then trust is a huge issue. If you're in another sector, trust might not be that important. So I'd say first it depends on the sector, but fundamentally your point is right, and I think the biggest thing about trust is not trying to interfere with people unless you've got something to say that is relevant to them. I suppose, Steve, what I would recommend anyway is starting with the big picture, because unless you start with the big picture, it's pretty hard to understand where you're headed or what role you play within that big picture. So I think the first step in the process that we spoke about is just understanding the market. If you have a little bit of money put aside for this exercise, then I'd recommend going to some specific consumer or industry research bodies such as Mintel or YouGov, and they have spent the time and the money analysing particular industries where you can find a wealth of information that will help you size or profile a market. So unless you understand the customer at an individual level and at a group level, it's going to be very hard to write that business plan and be confident that what you're about to do is the right thing to do. Having a proposition is really important, because it's insufficient to say I'm selling you a box and it's blue. Really, you have to understand what is different about this offering or about this service that you're wanting to provide. It generally starts with what are the benefits. So having consumed this service or this product that you're offering, what are the benefits it's going to bring me? That's the first part of a proposition. The next part of the proposition is, why is it unique? Because let's face it, there are going to be competitors out there, and one of the great things about being involved in a dynamic marketplace is having competitors and putting yourself above them, hopefully. I'm Michael Johnson, I'm Managing Director of AA Financial Services, and we're talking about taking things to market and some of the things you should be aware of. For my money, it's about having a plan, and having a plan means, firstly, you need to be passionate about what you're doing, but you also need to be objective and ruthless about some of the decisions that you'll make along the way. The plan that I would recommend sort of starts at the top with the big picture, such as understanding the market. Once you've understood the market and where you fit, you would then understand the customer and understand the customer's needs, because there's no point producing a product that doesn't meet a customer's needs. From then, you would go on to define your proposition, to test and prototype your product, and then take it to market with a well thought through business plan. And hopefully from there, it's plain sailing.
Michael Johnson there, Managing Director of AA Financial Services, on how to define your proposition, test your prototype and take it to market. It's a great show, and don't forget you can watch that along with another 200 great shows if you simply go along to Business Connections Live. Fantastic programme, well worth watching it for an hour. And if you are in the corporate environment, you know, all these shows are there to give you insider tips, insider information on how to grow your business. You know, big brands really do have a lot lot of great ideas, and they can really be readily applied to startups, entrepreneurial startup businesses as well, for that matter. So if you want to get more information, watch the entire programme. Michael Johnson, Managing Director of AA Financial Services. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest on today's programme is Deborah Hume. She's the Director of Minerva Engagement. We're talking about neuroscience today. If, Deborah, somebody was to walk up to you and say, OK, give us your 30-second water cooler pitch on neuroscience, how would you define it?
Neuroscience is just helping us understand better how behaviour originates in the brain. So it's looking at the processes, the systems, the chemicals, if you like, and how they all work together with mind and body to drive our behaviour. I think that's the best way to think about it.
And what are the big messages that are coming out? I kind of alluded to the fact that it's a relatively, it's a new field, or it is very much the buzzwords at the moment. What do you feel is coming out of the neuroscience community? And why do you think it's important to business leaders?
One of the big things that's coming out of the neuroscience community is this move away from the fact that we are totally rational beings, and the importance that's being placed on the social connection that we need to make as human beings. And that's, for me, is really key, because in business, we've relied a lot over the last decades on rational thinking and rational behaving, whereas actually emotions underpin just about all our behaviours. And if we don't acknowledge or accept the social dimension, then we're missing a huge part of who we are as human beings, and therefore a huge part of what makes for effective engagement, motivation, and so on. So for me, that's really important. And in fact, actually, interestingly, there was a survey that was done a number of years ago. In fact, there were two that were done, where they were looking at leadership traits. And one, I think, included about 60,000 people, and they were trying to understand the key traits of good leaders. And two of the traits that came out were the ability to be results focused and to also be social, i.e. to have a social dimension. And if you asked employees, 72% of employees thought that those two skills were equally important. When you asked, because they did another survey later on, when you asked employees whether they felt that their leaders had those two capabilities, the ability to think in a results-focused way and the ability to think in a social way, employees felt that less than 1% of their leaders had those two capabilities. Which actually, when you think about it, if you're looking at the neuroscience of it, it's not unusual, because our rational thinking and our social thinking operate on two separate systems. So when we're thinking rationally, we're not thinking socially. When we're thinking socially, we're not thinking rationally. The key for effective leadership is to balance it, because when you're not aware and you're not focused on it, you're either stuck here rationally or you're stuck here socially. What we need to do is balance that neural seesaw so that we've got a mixture of both. But you don't even know that you need to focus on balancing that neural seesaw unless you're aware of the fact that you could be blocked, if you like, or stuck one way or the other.
Are we quite simple then in the way that we approach things? I mean, do we sometimes overcomplicate the situation when in fact actually the fundamentals are very basic and very simple, and they've been with us since God was a lad? Is it society? Is it the time? Is it the place that overcomplicates the situation?
I think it's the lack of understanding of some of the basic drives. So if you look at our need for social connection, that goes back to, as you say, when God was a boy, because if we didn't have social connection, if we didn't have trust, if we didn't have fairness, which are all just as important today, we react to them in the same way. If we didn't have those things, we didn't survive. So they're really deeply embedded in our minds and in our bodies to make sure that we are always looking for situations where we have fairness, or we have trust, or we have social connection. In fact, social connection is really interesting. If you isolate people, if you overlook people, if you don't praise people for job well done, that social pain is felt very, very acutely. So social pain and physical pain operate on the same networks. So you feel the same pain when you break your leg as you do when somebody has slighted you or left you out of an important discussion.
I mean, that lesson alone for business managers has really got to be taken on board, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Because it's nearly like it's a mental assault that has the same responses as a physical assault.
Absolutely. And the difference is actually quite interestingly, if you break your leg, and we've all broken something at some point in time, if you roll forward a year and you're telling a friend about your experience of your broken leg, you will be able to say to your friend that you broke your leg, you'll be able to explain how you did it, you'll be able to explain that it was painful. What you won't do is feel the visceral feelings of pain that you felt when you broke your leg. It won't come back in that way. If you can, and perhaps best not do it now, but if you, take my word for it this time, but if you have a break with a friend who's very close, if you're then relaying that to somebody a year ahead, you'll be able to do the same as the broken leg. You'll be able to say when it happened, how it happened, why it happened, but at the same time, you will feel the emotion. So the social pain goes deeper and it lasts longer, which is why 10 years after a very traumatic social event, it can still reduce us to tears. 10 years after a broken leg, it doesn't.
That is really, I mean, that is really fascinating. What about the environment? I mean, we often hear when we're talking about neuroscience and business, we hear the letters VUCA. Is it pronounced in a particular way?
VUCA.
VUCA. VUCA. But you may have seen it, VUCA. That kind of pops up occasionally. What's it? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and being ambiguous.
Yes.
See the way I got around that? I can't say ambiguity.
Ambiguity.
Yeah, it's not easy to say for me. But interesting. Can we just have the slide back up again? Let's just work our way through that. So is this society? Is this where the world is at the moment? That rate of change, the volatility, is that because businesses move so quickly these days that we're talking about that?
We use VUCA to describe a state and an environment, and many businesses now are going through continuous change, and with that comes a certain amount of volatility. VUCA itself, or VUCA, came into parlance VUCA came into parlance from the military, actually, at the end of the Cold War to describe the new world that we found ourselves in. It moved into the business world in 2008 when we were dealing with the ramifications of the financial crash, and since then a number of organisations have used VUCA as the shorthand just to describe the fact that we are in a changing environment.
So the volatility, which is really sort of moving very quickly, volatile environments that we find ourselves in, business markets that are moving very quickly as well. And that does leave us with something that no human being likes, is a feeling of uncertainty.
Yes.
And of course, that's the other part of it as well. We just look at the slide once again, you'll see what we're talking about. So volatility, rate of change, uncertainty, unclear about the present. Is that one of the areas that a lot of employees dislike the most, because they are uncertain about either their own worth within the business, what their destiny is? You often hear about there are three stages, aren't there? There's the past, the future, and the most popular one, the present. And we can do nothing about the past. We can only influence the future, so really we don't know what's going to happen the next second. But the present is the only bit that we can actually have any control over.
Yes.
Is that uncertainty in the workplace an area that leaves people maybe being less productive?
Oh, hugely. The reason uncertainty is such an issue is because as human beings, we're huge pattern-making machines. We fill in gaps very, very quickly. So if I was to put in front of you a paragraph of words where the letters were interchanged, you would still be able to read it because you are filling in the blanks. We're huge pattern-making machines. The reason that we are pattern-making machines is because it takes the load away from our thinking part of our brain. We don't have to use our thinking processes, which are resource-intensive. So when we are in a situation when we're uncertain, we can't see the patterns and we're struggling to put things in place. So instead of being focused on high quality thinking, decision making, goal setting, strategy, we divert our resources and our attention to what does this mean for me? How is this going to impact me? Why is this happening to me? What's going to happen? So from a performance point of view, it's very, very important to try, even in, or to work to, even in uncertain situations, to work to, as I said earlier, to bringing in a level of certainty. But it's also important for the individual, because if they are in a constant uncertain state, they're activating their fear threat state, which is actually activating their stress response, which is not good for either body or mind.
Which probably makes them less productive than they could be within the business. And I would imagine there are organisations that are out there that where people feel that they're under threat of perhaps losing their job or being moved on or whatever, and they see it perhaps maybe happening around them. And does that really have a big influence?
Well, the best way to bring this to life for people is to think about the brain in two ways, or to think about it as operating on two systems. Now, some people call it system 1, system 2, etc., etc. For the purposes of today, if you think about the brain being split into rational thinking, which is where we do all of our decision making, and the rest being the emotional part of the brain. Now, it's a bit more complex than that, but just for today, two elements. If you look at it in terms of size, the rational brain is the size of a cubic square metre, where we do all of our high thinking, really important for business. The rest of the brain is the equivalent of the Milky Way. All right. So when we're under stress, the important thing and I'm talking about high stress, when we're under stress, our cubic square metre of really good quality thinking reduces to a cubic square inch. An inch. And the other thing to add to that is that when we are going about our day, we only use this fantastic thinking part of our brain 3 to 5% of the time anyway. The rest of the time, we are working on automatic processes and automatic habits that have been laid down over a lifetime. So when we get up in the morning and we have our tea and we put on our socks and we get dressed and we travel to work, we do it all automatically. We're not thinking about it. The only time we think about it is if something's gone wrong. And then we have to think, something's gone wrong, what do I need to do? We only pull on those higher resources when we've got some really deep thinking to do, or a problem to do, or a problem to solve. So.
All right, listen, keep that thought in that 1 cubic inch, and we'll come back to that in just a few moments' time. We're looking at the whole area of neuroscience on today's program. We hope you're actually enjoying what you're watching today. It's a real fascinating insight, and how can it impact on your business as well, for that matter. You're watching Business Connections Live. Great to have your company with us on this edition of the program. Now, it is lovely to have you with me. My guest with me today is Deborah Hume. She's the Director of Minerva Engagement. And we are, as I said, we're talking neuroscience. Don't forget, if you do enjoy the program, say you'd like to have something like this for your own business. Would you like to have a program like this where you can actually put it out to your employees? Perhaps maybe a program like this one could engage them better. Say you were talking about the key things that are important to your business, but more importantly, the key things that are important to your workforce, your employees, then this would be the ideal place for you to actually explain that and get that over to them. So if you want to put together a package or something like that that's going to allow you to communicate with your workforce more effectively, well, why don't you get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live? We'd love to talk to you, even if it's just a starting off of ideas, a kind of a big pool of ideas that we throw some ideas into, and then you can pick the good ones that would work for you. Even if it's just a straight discussion and you just want to explore a few avenues, then why don't you get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live? It's dead easy to do that. All you got to do is drop us an email to studio@businessconnectionslive.com. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. If you want, you can also give us a call on the dog and bone. We don't mind talking to you. 01784 256 777 is our telephone number. If you want to follow our stream of consciousness, and we are giving out advice on a regular basis, there's 140 odd shows, there's over 200 hours of great business advice for free on our website. If you want to follow that, and we'll remind you of some of the different programs over the past 140 episodes, and then you can follow our stream of consciousness at BCL Business TV. See what I did there? Neuroscience, stream of consciousness. It's all clever stuff. You can actually follow us there, Business Connections Live, BCL Business TV. And don't forget as well, we'd love to hear your comments and your feedback as well. You can go to our Facebook website. In fact, you can get the programme on a number of different levels as well. Roku, you can watch us on our Roku channel, Stitcher, Blueberry. There are podcasts, both audio and also video there. And if you're downloading us on iTunes, leave a comment. Tell us what you like about the programme. We'd love to hear from you, because your comments, your feedback are what help us gauge what is going down well, what isn't going down well, and what we should do more of. And, you know, we've done programmes on employee engagement in the past. You might remember cloud bursting, where you could see that there was a cloud in the middle, you had the workforce below, you had the management above, and you had this thick layer of cloud between the two levels. And the whole program was, how do you get through that layer of cloud? It was called Cloud Busting. It was a great show, and you can find that on our website once again. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest on today's programme is Director of Minerva Engagement, it's Deborah Hume, and on this week's edition of the programme we're talking about neuroscience. We were going through the acronym, I love acronyms, VUCA.
No, VUCA.
VUCA.
VUCA's not VUCA.
VUCA. We've done the volatility and the uncertainty. Let's just look at that slide again, just to remind us where we'd got up to. So we had the volatility and the uncertainty. The next area then is going to be complexity. The world is getting more and more complicated. It's influencing us more in the workplace. Is that the truth, or are we just making it ourselves more complex in the workplace?
No, it is getting more complex. I mean, there are many things now for us to think about. Technology is driving the speed of change. We're being expected to multitask, although actually, funnily enough, we can't multitask. We multi-switch, which is slightly different. So the rate of change, the pace of change, the speed of change, all of the internal and external factors that we're having to take account of are increasing complexity quite considerably.
And so what can we do to, I mean, obviously that's going to be increasing the likes of stress and things like that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So is it a case of that we have to also, along with neuroscience, do we have to learn stress management, or is that all part of it?
We absolutely have to learn how to manage ourselves through what is becoming an increasingly complex world. And whilst our brains haven't got a hope of evolving fast enough in the next 10 years to keep up with the pace of change, with the insights that we're getting from the neuroscience community, and to be fair, neuroscience isn't a golden bullet. It's added to what we already know from psychology, the behavioural sciences, what we already know from the experiences that we've had within business. But because of that additional knowledge, we now have a better insight into how our brains work and how they work, particularly in tandem with our bodies, and actually being able to understand that, even having a basic awareness of that, will mean that we can get more out of what we've already got without having to rely on the evolutionary process to make up for what we're struggling with, if you like, around the complexity of what we do.
This is quite dangerous, isn't it? What we're talking about here. We're talking about, I'm going to use some words that are probably the wrong words to use, but it is manipulation of a state of mind, nearly, to a certain extent. How do we alleviate some of these issues in ourselves? Is it something that we can do ourselves personally to the way that we approach things? We've already said that the world is volatile. There's a certain amount of uncertainty out there, and it's getting more and more complex. Is there anything that we can do ourselves, or our managers within businesses can suggest to their workforce that they can do for themselves to alleviate some of the pressures that we're putting them under?
The thing I love about what's coming out of the field of neuroscience is that it applies absolutely to the individual and then extrapolates out. So it doesn't start...
So it starts at the employee.
It starts with, yes, absolutely. It starts with the individual. Organisations effectively, if you think about it, are made up of individuals. And actually, neuroscience is a way of helping all individuals manage themselves and manage their own emotions and stress and understand more about how they can put themselves into more of a positive than a negative state, if you like. And then you can then build that out across teams and across organisations. So if you look at stress, stress is set to overtake heart disease by 2030 as one of the biggest causes of illness in the developed world. That's huge. The impact on individuals is going to be huge, as is, of course, the impact on organisations. But there are things that we can now do as individuals to mitigate against excessive stress and therefore excessive release of cortisol, which affects our bodies and also reduces our thinking capabilities. So as we become more aware of the impact that stress has on us, not just, we've understood for quite a long period of time the impact it has on our bodies, but actually it has a huge impact, as I've said before, on our ability to think. It also has an impact on our ability to regulate our behaviour. So that's the reason why we slam doors and scream and shout when we're under stress, because our natural ability to regulate our behaviour sits in our prefrontal cortex, which is where all of our big thinking comes from. Once you become aware of the direct impact stress has on not just your teams, but also you can start to be much more reflective and thoughtful about what's happening to you. So if you notice that you're getting very emotional, if you notice that you sweat a lot and your heart's beating, if you notice that you're not sleeping well at night, if you notice that your thinking is becoming very distracted, then you can start to monitor where you are, if you like, on the stress curve, and you can start to understand your stress boundaries. Once you understand your stress boundaries, you can then start putting things in place to alleviate what's happening before it becomes a real problem. And you can do that for yourself, but you can also do that and support your teams, and you can do that at an organisational level.
Is there a piece of advice you could give somebody that finds themselves where they're seeing their team or they perceive their team to be in that position? Is there any advice that you could give them? Are there techniques that they can use? Or is it, once again, is it a case of standing back, appreciating what is going on within their team and trying to manage it with them?
Stress is very much driven by people being in the threat state. So if you can stand back and think through what is putting people in the threat state, then you can start to move some of those levers to reduce it. Now, that's a very big thing to say, but luckily what's coming out of neuroscience, again, and it's come from David Rock actually, is a framework that you can use to do that. So one of the things that the science community or the neuroscience community has realised is that as human beings, we work within, or there are 5 environmental factors, if you like, 5 social domains that particularly impact us when you're considering threat and reward. And the David Rock model that he brought out in 2008 is called the SCARF model, which some people may or may not have heard of. And that is essentially the acronym for the 5 domains that severely impact threat and reward state. So one is status. So when our status is threatened, it puts us under threat. The other is certainty, which we've already talked about. When we are not in a state of certainty, we go towards the threat state. The third one is autonomy. If we have no autonomy or control over what is happening to us, it puts us in a threat state. The fourth one is relatedness, which is that social connection that we spoke about earlier. If we don't feel a social connection, if we feel we're being excluded, if we're not part of a culture, we feel very threatened. And the last one is fairness, which is very closely linked to trust. So, and obviously some of them are have a relative, but if we're not feeling that we've been communicated with, dealt with, talked to, handled, managed in a fair way, it puts us into a threat state. So you can use some of the frameworks and the models that are coming out to step back and say, well, my team seem very distracted, they seem very stressed, they're under a lot of pressure. I know from all of the research that's coming out that I'm unlikely to be getting good thinking, good creativity, good innovation, and also it's having a huge negative impact on them as individuals. Let me use this framework to have a look at, are we impacting their status? Are we impacting their certainty? Are we impacting autonomy? Are we impacting relatedness, or are we impacting fairness? And you can almost map it you can see, once you start to think in those terms, where you are negatively or impacting. Now, there might be situations where you can't do anything about status, for example. You are going to impact somebody's status. You're either moving them to an area that they don't want to go to, or whatever. There's plenty of examples. If you know that you're going to negatively impact one area and there's not much you can do about it, you have to upweight what you're doing in the other 4 areas to counterbalance it. If you don't think that through, and if you haven't mapped it and you don't understand it, then we tend to, I hesitate to use the word blunder, but we tend to blunder through and just try and explain what we're doing without taking any account of those social domains, which are really important.
Statistically, from your experience in business, when we do that to a team of people, what kind of drop-off do we see in performance? I mean, because businesses work on the bottom line, don't they? They want the staff to be working the most effectively, the most cost-effectively, for the maximum profit. If you have a team of people working for you, and they've been managed into a state that is highly stressful, what kind of drop-off can you see in performance? Are there figures for that?
Figures I haven't got, I'm sure there are. I haven't got any off the top of my head.
I'm
not going to quote figures that I'm not going to. I'm sure I can lay my hands on them, but off the top of my head, I haven't got them. What I will say, though, is that I have witnessed that myself directly. So I've had seen examples of a team that was managed very well. A leader came in that managed in a very command control, fear, stress-driven way within a period of 2 weeks. And these were very experienced individuals. Within a period of 2 weeks, the performance dropped off the edge of a cliff. And they were very good, actually. As you were observing, the individuals in the team were very good at being seen to be busy, but actually on their earphone they were listening to music, or they were typing emails to no one, or whatever. So we are
just to look busy.
To look busy, because they were so demotivated and so disinterested that the performance just dropped off the edge of a cliff.
All right then. Well, remember that thought. I mean, maybe you've got people that are working within your organisation that are like that at the moment. We're looking at the world of neuroscience. My guest on today's program is Deborah Hume. She's the Director of Minerva Engagement, and we'll be more about neuroscience in just a moment. You're watching Business Connections Live. If you're enjoying today's programme, thank you very much indeed. Don't forget to leave a comment. If you're watching us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. Say what you think about the show. If you're watching us on our website, businessconnectionslive.com, that's fantastic. Once again, please do leave us a comment. If you're thinking to yourself, do you know what, I don't think I could handle an interview like that in the same way as perhaps maybe Deborah is doing today. What would you do if someone was to walk up to you with a microphone or a TV camera, and you had to get the best of yourself out to be able to position your business, position what you're trying to do at any particular time? Would you be any good at it? Have you ever had that experience? You know what it's like? They often say there are a couple of things that people don't like doing. Most people say they do not like talking in public. They would rather die than talk in public. How would you feel if a camera was being thrust in your face and you had to make a positioning statement about your business to a news reporter? Would you be prepared to do that? Are you prepared to do that? Would you like the expertise and the experience to understand how to go about doing that? Well, if you come on one of our training courses here at Business Connections Live, we can give you the tools, the relevant tools that you need to be able to go out there and to face the media. We give you experience and expertise in how to sit down and handle a TV interview. We introduce you to a TV studio, just like this one, strangely enough. We'll sit you down, we'll take you through the techniques that you need to do. We give you an understanding of what time is all about. A lot of people get lost when it comes to talking about time. 60 seconds can fly by in the blink of an eye, and an hour can either last forever. It all depends how it's going, actually. An hour can last for a week, or an hour can last for 2 seconds in our mind's eye. We give you the understanding of what you're trying to achieve, how you should have, we call them in the trade, little crutches that you should have with you, the things that you can fall back on, the techniques that you can use for thinking time, how to construct what you want to say, how you should always have a minute in your mind's eye once again, maybe a minute in your mind's eye about your own CV, a minute about your business, that water cooler pitch that you should have there. So if somebody asks you a question about your business, that you're not making up policy on the hoof.
I'm James Griffin from Iris Software, and my team have just completed the How to Handle the Media workshop. It was a really great course, it was really fun, and it was a really unique way for them to polish their presentation skills and learn how to answer difficult questions under pressure. So I'd highly recommend this to anybody that values those skills and really wants a great day out with their team.
If you'd like to find out more details about our How to Handle the Media training course, then why don't you get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live. Once again, I'll give you all the details because I don't think it never harms anybody to repeat yourself, and I repeat myself on a daily basis. studio@businessconnectionslive.com is our email address. Have a word with myself or Linda Bazant on this telephone number, 01 784 256 777. Don't forget, you can follow our stream of consciousness or send us a DM on Twitter at BCL Business TV. We'd love you to follow us. We've got about 3,500 Twitter followers, and we are just so careful about who we follow and why people follow us. If you are an SME or a small business, or you're in business management, or you feel you could be an expert on follow us. We'll follow you back. But it's not all about the numbers on this. It's all about the quality. This is our community, our BCL Business TV Twitter account. It's our business community, and we would love you to be part of it. So when you go on there are a lot of great experts that follow us. Just a great way to get engaged with other people as well. And don't forget as well, our Facebook page too. Go to Facebook and then go to Business Connections Live. You can follow the programs and you can leave comments there. So we look forward to communicating with you over the next couple of weeks. Just got to remind myself, where are we up to now? We are in the last quarter. I thought we were. It's going very well today. Lovely to have you with us, and I hope you're enjoying the live program as always on a Monday at lunchtime. You're watching Business Connections Live. Joining me in the studio today is Deborah Hume. She's the Director of Minerva Engagement, and we have been talking neuroscience today. Listen, do you know what? Here we are. We've talked for 45 minutes, and we've said nothing really. It's that big a subject.
It's huge.
But I think what comes over is the importance of what it is within our business. There was one area on our slide that we hadn't talked about. It's the area that we can't pronounce.
Ambiguity.
That's the area. That's it. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and
ambiguity.
The lack of clarity about meaning of an event.
Yes.
What does that mean to us in real life?
Now that brings in, again, the importance of narrative and sense-making. So when we are in really ambiguous situations, we don't really understand how the dots are joining up. We're not really sure what it means to us. And the big role of leaders and organisations in that space is to do that joining up, is to do the sense making, and is to make sure that there is a strong narrative that's linked back to vision and values. In fact, vision and values are really quite important, and we've done some research recently around vision and values. And when you ask people, do you communicate or do you communicate and engage within the context of your vision and values? Or do you think it's important, to do so? The answer is very much yes, we do. When you then ask the question, and do you do that? The percentage drops quite considerably. And it's interesting because the vision and values, again, they're seen as soft stuff, but they're so not. The vision and values do provide the mechanism to keep an eye on the future state. And there was a wonderful article in Harvard Business Review not so long ago where a chief executive was talking about some change that he had taken, and it was that he had taken his organisation through. And the change was absolutely deep and long and fundamental to the business survival. So it was very complex. And what he said was that he would not have been able to, the organisation would not have gone through that VUCA environment if they had not focused very strongly and kept tying everything back to their vision and values. And I'm not sure whether it was the chief exec or the guy that wrote the article, but one of the sentences that stuck in my mind was that they considered the vision and values to be the scaffolding that held everything together. And in times of ambiguity and change, sometimes, whilst we know we should invoke and reinforce our vision and values, sometimes we don't.
You're just showing off now because you can say it easily. Okay, I mean, we're rapidly approaching the end of the programme, which is somewhat bizarre because I feel we've only just started talking about it. Let's talk about the actual management, the implementation of neuroscience into business and what business owners can actually do when it comes to looking at neuroscience. How do you go about starting it? Is it something that they can do, or is it something that they need to talk to an expert externally about? Is there information that they can use? Where do you start? If I'm a business owner, I think, she said a lot of really good stuff today, but how do I implement that and bring that to my business? Where do you start?
There are a number of routes you can go, and it depends on your time and your resources, and obviously budgets to a certain extent. But there's plenty of information on the internet. There's plenty of web-based information that you can access that's freely available. The only thing that I would say about that is be very careful of your sources, because a lot of the popular media and some
is it the current King's New Clothes?
It is. And if you're not careful, you can be pulled down a path that perhaps isn't appropriate. So, but having said that, there's also some very good information on the internet. Now, obviously, to work your way through it takes time, and you have to be able to put some attention and effort to that. The other way is to work with individuals who have synthesized it and who do understand how it impacts organizations, and ask them to provide advice and input and work with them in a advisory, consultancy or coaching capacity.
Do you think the advantage that you have is the experience you've had from recruitment through to working at top level in employee engagement within large multinationals, and then applying what you've now learned with the neuroscience? Is it that combination that makes the difference? And there are going to be people who will do a course in neuroscience that, I don't know, how long does a course take?
Well, there are various things that you can do.
I bet there's one that takes a weekend, and then there's one that takes 2 years.
That I haven't seen. On average, the ones that I know about are about 6 to 7 months of quite hard learning, but then there are other ones that go on for a year, 18 months. I mean, it is quite a complex subject. You'd be struggling to do it in a weekend.
So the question then, that I'm an employer, I've got a team of people out there, I think there's something wrong. What is the question I should be asking a practitioner when I'm talking to them to make sure they're going to be the right people or the right person?
Well, the first thing I would say about that is, as I think I mentioned, neuroscience isn't the golden bullet. So to bring somebody in to talk purely about neuroscience would actually not help much. What you need to think about as a business leader is, what am I trying to do with this business? Where am I trying to go? What's my strategy and my objectives, and where am I on my people agenda journey? So you would be thinking about culture, vision and values and engagement. And then you would bring in the neuroscience into that. So you alluded that neuroscience might be helpful because of my communication, comms and engagement background. Absolutely, because I do have very deep experience of organisations and how they work. I have operated at board level really in the employee engagement space. What I am finding is that by bringing some of the learnings from neuroscience into that and synthesizing it, and the synthesizing is really important with what we already know, because we have vast experience within our organizations, by synthesizing it, then you can make a step change that makes a big difference in engagement, motivation and performance. And what I've found, just to finish off, when I've had conversations with leaders and when I've been talking to managers and run various workshops and what have you, their engagement with the subject matter has been absolutely fantastic. They're really hungry to learn, or to understand, probably.
If you want to find out more details and you want to talk to Deborah after the program, in just a moment, by the way, Deborah, I'm going to ask you the key takeaways that we need to remember about what neuroscience, how it works within business, the things that we really do need to remember. and the takeaways from the programme today. If you want to find out more about Deborah, you can go to her website, www.minervaengagement.com, and there's the website there, what they do. They are all about engaging people within organisations and businesses, the different techniques, the different tools that you need. It's not just about neuroscience, it's about understanding how business actually works, and that's what they're all about. You can find out what they do, how they do it, and what they would probably do is, I'm taking words out of your mouth now, but they would actually put together a package or a program that is going to be right for your organisation, for your business. They're going to be lifting the individual tools that they have in their toolbox to actually make certain they give you the best results. Is that kind of about right, wasn't it, what I said then? Deborah, camera number one is your camera, straight down camera number one. If you can just say who you are and where you're from, and the key takeaways that we need to remember from today's programme.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Deborah Hume and I'm from Minerva Engagement, and the key takeaways from today's programme are: always remember that the working environment is also a social environment, and that actually understanding emotion and the role that emotion plays within business is key to performance and also underpins employee engagement. I think the other takeaway is that leaders and managers have an incredibly important role within business. Their behaviour, the way that we handle ourselves, the way that we speak, the way that we interact with our teams is hugely important and makes a massive difference to the engagement and motivation of those teams around us. For me, if you look at an organisation, it is made up of structures and it is made up of processes, but it's also a huge ball of energy, and that energy comes from all of the individuals that operate within that business. And the key is making sure that that energy moves in the right direction, i.e. towards excitement and passion and motivation and creativity and innovation, and absolutely stays away from the threat responses that result in lack of thinking, no creativity, poor behaviour, etc., which actually have no place in sustainable long-term business performance.
Do you know, it's been an absolutely fascinating programme. I think the thing that struck me about all of this is that when we were talking about doing the programme initially, you know, you say an hour, we're going to explain it in a whole hour, and then all of a sudden you realise that an hour isn't long enough. This is something to get even just to get a grip of the top line of this, you need to be talking for a couple of hours and a couple of meetings, a couple of opportunities to sit down. Is that what you're finding when you're going out? Do people get it on the first hit, or do you have to go in, they digest the information, then you go back and you go, so what do you remember from the last part of the conversation? Do you find that you have to go back once or twice to really get the essence of what neuroscience is all about over to them?
Yes, you do. I mean, it is a huge, vast subject, and today we've literally just tickled the surface.
I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface. Yes, not even scratched it.
But I think what I keep coming back to is that whilst it is a huge subject, the learnings need to be applied practically within business. So dependent on where the business is on its journey, you will take the learnings that are appropriate and apply within what you're already doing. So that is an ongoing conversation, and it's also an ongoing assessment and monitoring and understanding. And the final thing I'd like to say, because this is important, and this was a big thing for me actually, is that what they have found recently is that our brains have plasticity. What that means is we do not have set, structured brains that do not change once they have formed in early adulthood. That means that we can always change our behaviour and learn different ways of doing things. And we change our behaviour ourselves by being very careful on what we focus our attention on. But we should also be aware that the structure of our brain is changed by the environment that we put ourselves in. So if we are in an environment that is particularly toxic, that will start over time, if we leave ourselves there, to affect our brains, the way that they're structured, the connections that we make, which will then start changing our behaviour to align with the toxic environment. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And can I say, on that bombshell, it's got to be done. Thank you very much indeed for being on the programme today. It's been absolute real insight. And I hope you enjoyed this edition of Business Connections Live. Well, it only leaves me now to do the housekeeping, and let's have a quick gander at what we've got coming up over the next couple of weeks. Next week's show, I guess, is going to be Andrew Weaver. He's the CEO and the founder of Lawyer Fair. No one who launches a startup should be looking for an easy life. It's all about perseverance, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Andrew has been through all the different gambits of when it comes to starting a business up. At the moment, going through, I think, some crowdfunding is an area that he's looking at the moment. It's been a real insight because we started off looking at traditional funding for seed funding initially for the business. And we've gone on, we've followed the development of this. Andrew, he's a very informative talker. He's very, very engaging, slightly off the wall. You'll really enjoy the program. So he's on next week's edition of Business Connections Live. Coming up on future programs, Vic Williams from Audacious, Ali Crump, the AA, another person from the AA joining us. Dr. Linda Shaw, business psychologist, will be joining us. So it's strange, and it all comes along. It's like buses programs. So we're talking neuroscience. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to talk. We've got a psychologist on the program. Victoria Vickery, All-Star Marketing Club, Ginny Carter, the author maker. That's great. Now, if you're thinking about getting out there and having your own book, there is just there is vanity publishing in inverted commas. But the thing I've realised is that most public speakers, most people who are acting as consultants now, what they are doing, they're writing books and they're finding it a great calling card for their business or for their organisation. So should you be writing a book about your business at the moment where you can share your insights, your secrets, your strategy to other people? Because remember, you can tell somebody everything. It doesn't mean they're going to go away and do it. So the author maker is going to be on the program. That's the author maker, James Potter. And then also we've got... Ginny Carter's the author maker. James Potter, the LinkedIn man, is going to be joining us as well. In fact, we've got a whole raft of different programs coming up over the next couple of months. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed today's program. If you're watching in the Cambridge area, hope you enjoyed today's show as well, for that matter. But from all the team here at Business Connections Live, thank you very much for watching us on today's program. Deborah Hume was my guest, Director of Minerva Engagement, and hope you enjoyed getting a real insight into the whole world of neuroscience. But until we do it all again live next Monday, have yourself a great week. And from me, Steve Highland, and from Deborah Hume, thank you very much for watching, and bye for now. Bye-bye.